Welcome to ALAQA, a podcast about the relationships shaping systems, capital, and the climate transition. Today, I'm joined by Krisztina Tora, a global leader in impact investing and impact markets, known for shifting capital flows toward real impact in over 70 countries. Krisztina has advised financial institutions, governments, and civil society on building inclusive impact economies while also creating partnerships that help diverse stakeholders co-design systemic solutions. Her work is driven by a conviction that finance must serve equality, dignity, and sustainability, and by a willingness to challenge entrenched belief systems. In this episode, we'll explore what it takes to transform finance from within and why breaking out from our bubbles is essential for real systems change. Hello, Krisztina. It's so nice to have you here with us today. It's funny because last time we saw each other, it was in a room full of change makers and innovators and financial professionals. I'm really grateful that you accepted to jump in for a deeper dive and a different dive, let's say, on what occupies, as far as I understand, a lot of your workdays and perhaps more.
It's a pleasure and it's an honor.
Thank you. So, Krisztina, I love the boldness of your intro on LinkedIn. You know, the tagline, I love it because it shows the ambition that I admire, like changing the financial system in 70 countries. Boom. Can you tell us what brought you professionally to this journey and to the point where you are now?
It's difficult to know actually where to start the story. I'll give you maybe one anecdote from the beginning of my career and then also why I am here today. So I started my career, I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do. I knew what I didn't want to do. And I thought, let's try communications. Seems like a really general perspective on how businesses progress, how you can help businesses with different elements. And so I went to work in the fashion industry and it was so interesting. I was working in a lingerie company, so I had a lot of fun. We rebranded the brand that I was working with. So we did communication campaigns, photo shootings. I worked on a fashion show. So I did so many interesting things and it was really fun and I learned a lot. But I also realized that it's an industry where you work very hard for 6 months, you create a collection, and then 6 months later, you throw everything to the trash and you start again. That was for me a really big realization. I thought, wow, this is not how I want to spend my life. And I really shifted completely away from this industry and wanting to completely refocus myself and actually my career on. At that time, we were talking about sustainable development. It was the beginnings of sustainability, barely speaking about social entrepreneurship. It was just emerging at that time. Impact investment was nowhere to be spoken about. So it was really looking at how I can invest my time, my energy, my efforts to support sustainability and the advancement of sustainability. Fast forward, serendipity happens and different roles brought me to different activities. But in the past, I would say decade, I've really worked with the methodology of networks because I think that the problems that we have in our society, in our world, are so big and so complex, so interconnected that the only way to solve them is by bringing people together across geographies, across sectors, across industries, really to bring out the best of the intelligence of what everyone has to bring to the table, because that's the only way, in my perspective, to solve the problems. In 2013, I co-founded and I ran a network called Global Social Entrepreneurship Network, which was a network of incubators and accelerators working with early stage social entrepreneurs, so very beginning entrepreneurs, supporting how they start and how they start growing. But those incubators and accelerators had also a lot of challenges and it's a really difficult business model still to be running those organizations. And that really got me into fully 2 feet in the impact space. And I then pivoted to join GST Impact almost 8 years ago because I thought that it would give me a much better, much broader platform to still help those early stage entrepreneurs, but with a different perspective where I can really work on the whole value chain of how they access the support and the capital, and how we solve different barriers along the value chain at different moments with the different ecosystem players. Today, that's what I'm doing at the GHG, helping many countries look at what their ecosystem looks like, what it needs, and how they can transform their ecosystem and their economies into what we call impact economies. Economies where impact is a key decision driver of all decisions: investment, business, policy, and consumption decisions. So that's the objective. We want to create impact economies around the world.
It's a fascinating journey. So, what do you think in terms of relationships or perhaps external events? What do you think shaped the way you started thinking about capital and impact through a systems lens? Is it something that came gradually? Is it through the connections that you described, through the networks that you described? How did you start diving into this very intense field? Let's put it this way, because it is a big and messy one.
I don't know if there was any one specific thing. When you're looking at the issues, whichever issue you're looking at, inequality, poverty, climate change, you name it, when you look and you ask why, many times the question why, you have an issue that comes up about how the financial system works and how it operates. So my perspective, my analysis is that we can do so many things, but until we change the financial system and how it operates, we won't be successful in the scale of transformations that are needed, or the sustainability of transformations, because maybe you might succeed one day, but then the positive transformation that you brought to the world might not be sustained because it's undercut by how the financial system functions and how it, in a way, extracts value from where value is being created.
I have a question for you about one specific example. I know that you mentioned the social entrepreneurs as a very important part in your professional journey and in your general path towards thinking and acting on financial systems. Beyond the social entrepreneurs, SMEs in all sorts of countries globally are a particular center of interest of yours. Can you give us an example just to give some flesh to what does it take to say, hey, if this government, if this number of public and private institutions work together, not just putting them in one room, but work together actively to do this or to stop doing this can be a very sophisticated set of policies, not just one action, obviously. Then SMEs will be able to provide more equality, more inclusion, more dignity to the local populations and better life conditions, really. Can you give us one example?
Where there's obviously many examples, many different initiatives that are going on, but I would like to take the example of the UK. It's a country where for many decades now, the government has been very supportive of the development of the impact ecosystem and specifically the social side of it. And many actors have contributed to make those advancements, because obviously the government doesn't work in a vacuum. It works with the different players in the sector. So let me give a few milestones on that journey that shaped how the ecosystem works in the UK. In 2012, there was a task force that was created by the government to look at how we can reduce poverty with the private sector. And thanks to that task force, which was actually led by our president, Sir Ronald Cohen, there was the creation of something that is called today Better Society Capital, which is what we call an impact wholesaler. So it's a very large kind of investment bank, if I may describe it in this way, that has as a mission to invest and expand the market for social investment in the UK. What happened there is that they decided to use what is called unclaimed assets, so basically dormant bank accounts that haven't been touched by their owners for a very long time. They took that, they put it in there, so 400 million of that, and they asked the 4 largest banks in the country to also put 50 million each. So in total, 600 million into this impact wholesale vehicle. I just want to highlight the fact that it's not just an investment bank that they created. They gave it a specific mandate to build the market.
Hmm.
So, of course, they were doing investments, but they were doing also a number of projects to improve how the ecosystem was working. For example, one of their investment themes was around homelessness. And so they were investing in different market solutions to alleviate homelessness, but they also realized that actually there were some issues in the homelessness support ecosystem. And they created working groups between the different actors of that value chain. They created a number of activities to improve, generally speaking, how the support was being delivered. So fast forward, the result of this impact wholesaler is that over 10 years, and they made an assessment and the data is out there, over 10 years, this has multiplied by 10 the size of the market. And also for each £1 that they invested, a little bit less than £3 from other investors came in. So they really were able to attract and mobilize other investors, other private investors into the topics that they were investing in. That's one example. And they have continued to evolve the market based on that. Then they realized that actually there was something that was missing in the market, is that the entrepreneurs or sometimes even the funds were not ready to be invested. So they created something called the Access Foundation to help with that investment readiness. Today, actually, this week or a couple of days ago, they launched a 500 million outcome fund that is more specifically targeting funds that are new fund managers, that are women-led fund managers, or women-led funds, or Black and minority ethnic-owned funds. So really to improve the diversity of the impact investment space. Many different examples from the UK that other countries can get inspiration from and really replicate how they have done it or the ways that they have done it. And maybe one other, because the UK has been one of the most developed. France is probably the second one, but the UK was the leader and is the leader in social impact bonds. They have really trained their civil servants, so in many different offices of civil service, to be able to create those social impact bonds and to support them and to create the next wave and next generation. And also help the civil service and generally speaking, the governments to spend better the money that they have so that they can really have more impact with the public money. So there was something called the Social Value Act that was passed that was basically incentivizing all public procurement to not only take into account the financial value, so not always go with the lowest bidder, but go and assess the social and environmental value created by the people who were responding to calls for proposals for public procurement.
That's a fascinating example because clearly you were talking about activities and projects, but there were people behind these activities and these projects. And the vision, I'm sure, has evolved as more people and more ideas flown in. So thank you for this example. Coming back to this big question of handling the transitions, the climate one, but not the only one, clearly, and not only in the most developed economies. What is the one relationship that you've been nurturing over time, or perhaps more recently, that you feel could be particularly illustrative of how you're trying to push the financial system in a certain way to, again, allocate more money into inclusivity, into equality, into dignity and respectful development? So one relationship that comes to your mind.
For me, it's really difficult to narrow it down to one. If I have to maybe name this category of relationship, is the category of relationship with our, what we call at GSG Impact, our national partners. Let me explain why this is so important from my perspective. So at GSG Impact, like I said, our mission is to build impact economies. Now, how do we do that? And that's really our unique recipe, is that we work with countries. And when I say countries, we work with their impact ecosystem. So with the entire ecosystem of impact in that country. And we help that ecosystem come together and form a new institution that will have exactly this mission: drive the country towards becoming an impact economy. So how does it happen? When we say the entire ecosystem, we look at what we call the 5 pillars. So the entrepreneurs, people working with the entrepreneurs, supporting the entrepreneur network. So that's the demand side. Then the intermediaries, so those who will connect the capital with the entrepreneurs. Then the whole value chain of capital supply. So that can be large pension funds, commercial banks, impact investors, foundations, angel investors, you name it, those who will bring the capital. Then the group that we call market builders, so academic institutions, civil society organizations, consultancies, and so on. And then finally, with the government and policymakers, always in partnership with this private sector group. So they come together, we help them through a methodology to co-create a national strategy for impact. And then we help them to implement it, and we are there alongside them to support them with the implementation. Usually it's around two key activities or key objectives. One, policy change, so working with the government to change policies, create new regulations that will allow capital to flow towards impact, and catalyzing new kinds of financial vehicles or financial instruments that may be missing in the markets, depending on what the market is and needs. So today, thanks to this work, we represent 50 countries that have already created these national institutions. And the reason why, for me, it's such an important relationship is because we have a methodology, but the methodology is applicable to all countries. It's flexible for all countries to apply. And they build their own institution, they build their own impact strategy for themselves. It's by and for the ecosystems in a way that is really inclusive, representative, that has a specific governance system behind it that allows for that inclusivity and that representativity, and also for rotation of stakeholders. And so for me, that's really important because we are here to support. We are here to support the creation of the infrastructure that will be there for a very long time, resilient to changes, because they will be the ones finding the right solutions for themselves over time. And that's great.
If you've been at GSG Impact for 8 years, I'm sure you attended a number of creation of these national partners. In terms of observations of the process, what did it teach you or what did it inspire you about the notions of power and trust and interdependence? What lessons can you share with us?
So many lessons, but it takes time. I think that's something that we, in our world and how we work, we want everything to happen for tomorrow. But trust and collaboration and co-creation takes time. It's not something that happens overnight. It has to be curated in a very, specific way, in a way where you create the space for people to come together, where you make them feel safe to share and express their views, agree to disagree, and enable those conversations to happen and those relationships to be created. Because it's about people who probably have never set a foot in the same room together, that have never worked together, that don't know each other, and perhaps even might be having preconceived ideas about each other. Getting the CEO of a bank to work with someone who's impact management and measurement specialist, to work with someone who's running a social enterprise network, and so on and so forth. Those people, they don't meet, or maybe they meet in other social functions, but they don't have the opportunity to really work on a purpose together. That's one thing. The second thing is that, for me, it's so obvious, but perhaps it's worth saying it. People are motivated by the higher purpose. You bring people together because it's not that difficult to say, hey guys, would you like to build something better for your country? How amazing would it be if you came together to build something better for your country? And people say yes. They say yes, of course. And they do it on top of their day jobs because they're wanting to do it. And so I think maybe that's the second learning. And the third learning, which for me is so precious, is that yes, of course, you get to these amazing results. 17 countries have changed policies in a way that helps drive more capital towards impact. 19 countries have or are in the process of launching these big financial vehicles that will help their markets to be expanded and the social entrepreneurs or the entrepreneurs to get the right kind of money. Yes, of course, those are the results, and that's amazing. That's what this allows. But for me, if the process is not right, it doesn't happen. And so for me, the process is invisible or not so much valued, but it's so important. It's really where my attention goes, because it's a very kind of careful work of art every time, because each context is different, each country is different, the power dynamics in each country is extremely different, and you have to understand that if you want to create the right kind of results.
For somebody who is interested into contributing to being part of the solution when it comes to financial systems, if he or she were a trainee spending 6 months with you, what would be one of your first recommendations to this new trainee to pay attention to?
Boldness or not limiting yourself. Like I said, we're representing 50 countries in a very little time. We grew from, in 2013, it was 8 countries, and now we're at nearly 50 countries. So I think the sky is the limit in a way. And oftentimes our thinking is limited by what we know. But having the space and the time to think about what could be is really important. I think that's maybe something that could be a guidance or an advice. Is not being shy for the amazing results that you can create.
Jumping to the part where we discuss slightly less positive things, the minute you want to do something with people, inevitably there are tensions, there are misunderstandings, there are gaps, let's say, there are needs for alignment. Can you tell us about one challenge that you faced navigating the complexity of these relationships that we've been discussing for now? And how did you work through it?
What I've learned and what I've gotten more comfortable with over time is to better understand the financial jargon. Like every industry, the financial industry has its jargon. I think that it's specifically excluding jargon because there are many technical terms. When you actually understand what it stands for, the mechanisms that lie behind some of the jargon, you're like, wow, okay, this is very simple. It's not that difficult to understand what you mean. It's just that there is a very specific vocabulary that is being used by people in the financial industry. And that can feel, for someone who has never worked in the financial industry, who's not familiar with that vocabulary, or who doesn't understand what those terms are, can feel a little bit daunting. And I think that over time, I've gotten much more comfortable with my role as being the translator and the bridge. What we need is that people start engaging and working together to creating the right kind of solutions, to innovate also in the financial industry. There's so many interesting innovations happening that will help drive more impact, a more regenerative approaches of doing finance and of investing. So I think that enabling that to happen, and that's, for example, to some extent what I'm doing with my podcast, Women Changing Finance, is making finance more approachable so that people understand that it can be used for good. It is already used for good by many people, many women across all of the world, and that actually it's a tool that you can use. It's a means towards an end. And helping change makers understand how to use finance and different financial instruments can be really powerful to accelerate change.
Beyond the question of jargon, which is understanding the current definition within the current financial system of that word, of that acronym, to get a sense of what it actually means and the mechanisms behind concept, helps to challenge it and to question the fundamental and therefore pivot or get a chance to support better, for instance, social entrepreneurs or change at scale. Specifically, I have 2 or 3 concepts in mind. Obviously, the topic of risk, addressing climate transitions when you have financial investors who are still thinking about what risk they are prepared to take when discussing with impact solutions or impact investors. But the reality of the risk that they're exposed to and their vulnerability of the rest and the majority of their portfolio and the majority of the economy is totally invisible. It's not discussed. So understanding that the returns that are expected are supposed to come to cover the risks that are taken questioning what's behind this concept and how they're used, for me, is a very fruitful and fertile starting point of a conversation that can open, let's say, a different dynamic and a different power dynamic as well. So yeah, thank you. It's a very powerful topic, the question of language. Krisztina, you know that I don't go with the flow, that I don't think like the crowd. No offense for the crowd. And I love the concept of being contrarian, right? And it's an investment strategy as well. So we're jumping to the section called Contrarian Thoughts. So I would like you, Krisztina, to leave a statement, an idea, a hot topic that will be commented by future guests, creating a chain, therefore, and something that can be seen as difficult to swallow.
Something that's been on my mind is the fact that our societies are very polarized. We are going more and more to the extremes, whichever extreme you favor. It's really difficult to have conversations with people who are not believing in the same things than you. And actually, people might just shut you down to say, this is my view, this is your view, I don't want to discuss it. So even the space for conversation has been reduced, not just the willingness, but the space. And we are working to make things better. If we boil it down, that's what we're trying to do. But I also feel that we are in a bubble most of the time, and we don't challenge ourselves enough about the thinking structures, the mindsets that we're in, sometimes a little bit too much in the auto self-congratulating mode, even if it's really important to also protect yourself and remain optimistic and positive to be able to do this work. So there's a tension there. But still, I feel that we don't sufficiently engage in conversations with people who don't think in the same way, or that we don't challenge sufficiently each other on the belief systems or the ways that we're operating, because all of us, myself included, we could be doing things better. We could be challenging ourselves in many different ways on many different topics in how we deliver our work. I wish I could commit to something specific, but it's really hard and difficult. So I'm committing myself to keep thinking about how I can do that best and how I can encourage others to do that. I don't know if it's a blind spot, but it's something that we're not doing or not doing enough of.
I would have so many things to say about it, but it is your thought, not mine. But coming back to the question of the concepts, these concepts can be prisons. They can be boxes by themselves that can imprison the possibilities of making change happen. For instance, the notion of performance. Is it something good for your performance to spend a time with me today? Is it the most efficient use of your time and mine? This is a very tough one, I think. Anyway, that would need a longer episode. I have a more cheerful one. Your go-to person. Since we're talking about relationships and systems and networks, you mentioned the fact that you built a network of networks. It would be nice to have a shout-out moment. So who would be your go-to person when thinking about changing the system?
I don't know if it's my go-to person as such, but it's definitely someone that I profoundly respect and admire in the space. She's called Delilah Rothenberg. She's the founder and the executive director of something called the Pre-Distribution Initiative. And she's actually someone that is one of those thinkers and one of those people who really is thinking about the system as a whole. Her work is really about assessing systemic risk and how to integrate systemic risk in the work of investors and how to enable investors to think at a much more systemic level. All that with the objective of reducing inequalities. So that's the end goal of her work. And it's called pre-distribution because the idea is, how about not just redistributing once you made the money, but how about actually ensuring that whatever financial value is created is being distributed in the right way to all of the people who have created the value, including the workers. I hope I described it well. And if she listens to this, she will agree to what I'm saying. But definitely that's my understanding of her work. And it's a very inspiring organization and a very inspiring person who's like leading it and thinking about all of these issues.
So our last part, it's the flash round. Time for big questions and short answers.
Okay, let's try.
Ready? First question. What is a question you wish more investors would ask?
I hope that one day investors will systematically ask themselves how to include different voices, especially the voices that are, I don't like the word, but beneficiaries of their investments into their investment decision making process. That's one. And the second is having investors really think about their business models and how to make their business models more redistributive rather than extractive.
Why don't you like the word beneficiaries?
Because it's passive and it doesn't represent the fact that they are individuals who are interacting with the world and who,
Who have agency.
exactly.
It's not because they're not clients that they don't have agency and control of some sorts. I understand. Second flash question. One book or practice that helps you to hold complexity, to hold the countless threads and ambiguities and tensions that you manage every day.
The work of Donella Meadows, who actually is the person who really created system thinking, is some of the work that I go back to on a regular basis, because the way that she describes system change and what it is and how to think about it is really actually fundamental, and it's a really nice way to go back to the essentials. And there is this one piece that is called Dancing with the System that I really like, because it really shows the dynamic nature of the work. Yes, complexity is not something that you can map out because it always changes, it's always evolving. And holding the space for that dynamism and uncertainty, because it's uncertain, the outcomes are not certain, it's not 1+1. And so going back to this work is for me something that helps kind of think about what we're doing, how to do it.
I love the poetry. There's a formal beauty in the way she expresses her relationship to systems. It's funny because when I started reading about her work in 2012, I started with the more poetic part of her work, which felt more approachable, less daunting, less scary, less, oh, that's for engineers, that's for, I don't know, statisticians. Very interesting that how some things can scare you depending on where you are and how you see yourself in your capacity to understand new things. Another question, a system you'd love to see expand, to see more of in terms of presence in everybody's minds or in the governance minds, for instance, or systems that you'd love to see be actually disrupted?
One of the necessary fundamentals for system change is how we change our mindsets and our behaviors. And to change our mindsets and behaviors, we, at least in my view, need to work on our internal being, our minds. It's very interesting because we have the SDGs, we have 17 of them, but actually none of those is dealing about our mindsets and our behaviors. And so actually there's a group of people who created something called the inner development goals. I don't even want to say the 18th because it's an underlying factor and enabler for change to happen. And so for me, working on ourselves and starting with ourselves is so important. All types of mindfulness practices and personal development are the starting point for change to happen, and for change to happen in the way that is creating abundance and unleashing well-being for all people.
I'm sure you're aware of the criticism around the topic of well-being as expressed and as practiced in the Western countries, and how it can be self-serving, how it can be not exactly centered around the systems change, but more as a repackaging of a current very extractive and predatory system. So how do you make sure that you protect yourself from these risks? Because working on one's mindsets and one's set of beliefs and habits and how we engage with one another is clearly in your work, for sure. But did you spend time thinking about how to distance yourself from the risks that I mentioned and the criticism that I mentioned? I don't have the solution, and it's a recurring criticism that I hear.
No, but I think that I haven't really fundamentally thought about this aspect. But for me, what you're saying is because it diverged from what it should be. It's misused. We created a market out of something which shouldn't be a market. I understand the criticism, but for me, it's questioning yourself, listening to others, trying to work with less ego, hopefully no ego. Like some fundamental aspects of how you show up to the world. It's always thinking about who else should be in the room, which voice is not being listened to. How do we bring those voices in? And I really don't have all the answers at all. And I have way more questions than answers.
But I like the fact that you have open questions. They are not yes or no question. Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. And my last question to you, Krisztina, what gives you hope in this journey in the climate/impact space at the moment?
Actually, all of the people that I work with and that I see, that I meet,
They're lovely. They're great.
actually, yes. I feel so fortunate and so privileged. This is amazing. If I may do a little bit more advertising for my podcast, that's exactly what I want to show is amazing things, amazing initiatives are being developed, led all everywhere in the world. It's not something that is just here or there. It's everywhere in the world. Great stuff is happening. And I have such a wonderful position to be able to see that unfolding. And that's what I want to bring to the world. That's what gives me optimism. Is the energy, the passion, the resilience of everyone who's working in this space to really try and change things for the better.
Thank you, Krisztina, for these very powerful words.
Thank you so much, Imen. Thank you.
And thank you all for listening to ALAQA. And if this conversation sparked something for you, share it, leave a review, and subscribe for more dialogues at the section of capital, systems, and transformation.